Before we get started, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Tell me your city, your state, wherever you are in the world. And if you're new here, welcome to Crimson Secrets. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. Now let me tell you about the night Madeleine Holloway stood in the doorway of a $5 million penthouse and decided that 12 years of her life was enough. She didn't cry. That was the part nobody expected. Not her husband, not the woman standing behind him in a silk robe that didn't belong to her, not even Madeleine herself, who had rehearsed this moment in the back of her mind for longer than she was willing to admit. She just looked at them both, long enough to make sure she's seeing exactly what she thought she had seen, and then she picked up her coat from the hook beside the door, the hook she had chosen when they moved in, the one shaped like a small iron branch, and she walked back out into the hallway. The elevator doors closed behind her. That was all. Madeleine Holloway had married Garrett Cross when she was 29 years old, and he was 34. And for the first 3 years she had believed, with the particular stubbornness of a person who has built something from almost nothing, that she had made the right choice. Garrett was brilliant in the way that certain men are brilliant. Loudly, visibly, in ways that filled a room. He ran Cross Capital, a private equity firm his father had started, and that he had tripled in size by the time he was 40. He wore his confidence the way other men wore expensive watches, which is to say constantly, and in a way that made other people feel slightly underdressed. He was charming at dinner parties. He remembered the names of waitstaff. He told a story about losing everything at 31 and rebuilding from scratch that made grown men get a little quiet, and women lean forward in their chairs. Madeleine had leaned forward too, once. What Garrett did not know, what almost no one knew, was that the woman he had married was not the woman she appeared to be. She had let him believe certain things. Not lies, exactly. More like silences. She had let him believe that her consulting work was modest. She had let him believe that the small office she kept in Midtown was just somewhere she went to think. She had let him believe that the calls she took on Saturday mornings, the ones where she stepped out onto the balcony and spoke, were with her sister in Portland. They were not with her sister. They were with the board of a biomedical research company called Aldrin Scientific, of which Madeleine Holloway was the majority shareholder, the silent co-founder, and the woman whose proprietary licensing agreements had generated just under $400 million in revenue over the past 6 years. She had her reasons for the silence. But we will get to that. The night she walked out of the penthouse, Madeleine took a cab to a hotel she had booked 3 weeks earlier. Not because she had known what she would find when she came home early from the Geneva conference, but because she had learned a long time ago that the prepared mind suffers less. Her room was on the 14th floor. She sat on the edge of the bed in her coat, and her conference badge, and her good shoes, and she did not call anyone. She ordered room service. She watched 20 minutes of a documentary about migratory birds, and then she slept for 9 hours, which was the best sleep she had gotten in 4 months. In the morning, she sent one text message. It was to her attorney, a woman named Beverly, who had been with her since the beginning of Aldrin and who understood, without needing things spelled out, what it meant to receive a text from Madeleine on a Wednesday morning that said only, "It's time. Let's move." Then she ordered coffee, opened her laptop, and went back to work. Garrett called 11 times. She watched the calls come in from across the room, her phone propped against the lamp, and she did not answer a single one. Not because she was angry, though she was. In the clean and manageable way she allowed herself to be angry, the way you feel heat from a fireplace when there is glass between you and the flame, but because there was nothing he could say that would change what she had already decided, and she had learned long ago that the conversations you have in the first 24 hours are the ones you regret most. On the second day, he showed up at her office. She was not there. She was in Brooklyn, sitting in a coffee shop with Beverly, going over documents. On the third day, he sent flowers. 12 white orchids, her favorite, which told her he had remembered something she mentioned years ago, which told her he was now paying a level of attention to her preferences that he had apparently not been paying when she was actually present in his life. She donated them to the hospital lobby downstairs. What Garrett did not understand, what he was only beginning to understand with the slow and terrible comprehension of a man who has been comfortable for too long, was that Madeleine had not left in anger. She had left in clarity. There is a significant difference between those two things, and the difference matters enormously, because anger fades and clarity does not. They had met at a fundraiser for a children's hospital on the Upper West Side. She had been there representing Aldrin, though no one in the room knew that. He had been there because his name was on the building. He had introduced himself with the particular ease of a man who has never had to try very hard, and she had been charmed despite herself because she was 39 and had spent the better part of a decade working 18-hour days. And she was, in ways she would only admit to herself, much later, very tired of being alone. They were married 11 months later. Small ceremony, Hudson Valley. Her sister flew in from Portland. His father gave a toast that lasted 8 minutes and was mostly about Garrett. She had thought, I can work with this. I have worked with harder things. And for a while, she was right. The trouble did not announce itself. That is the thing about trouble in a marriage. It doesn't arrive at the front door with luggage. It seeps in under the baseboards. It shows up in the small moments, the ones you explain away. The dinner where he talked over her to his colleague for 40 minutes. The vacation where he made every plan and then was bored by all of them. The night she came home from a board meeting running on 4 hours of sleep, and the particular satisfaction of having just closed a deal that she would never be able to tell him about. And he said, without looking up from his phone, "You seem tired. You should find work that doesn't stress you out so much." She had stood in the kitchen and looked at the back of his head and thought something that she immediately folded up and put away. She was good at putting things away. What she was less good at, what she would later recognize as the central mistake of those years, was telling herself that the putting away was the same as the resolving. His name was Cross Capital. Her name was Silence, and for 4 years, that was the arrangement. She stayed because she had loved him, genuinely, in the beginning. She stayed because she believed in the version of him that showed up on the morning her mother died and sat with her on the kitchen floor for 2 hours without saying a single word, which was exactly right, which was the only right thing. She stayed because she understood that people are not one thing, and that a man who can do that can also be the man who talks over her at dinner. And she thought the first man was the real one, and the second was just habit. She was wrong. They were both real. That is the thing no one tells you. She found out about the woman. Her name was Petra. She was 32. She worked in Garrett's firm in a role that Madeleine had always found vaguely undefined, not through a text message or receipt, or any of the ways these things are usually discovered. She found out because she came home from Geneva 2 days early, because the second panel had been canceled, because she had been looking forward to sleeping in her own bed, and because life has a particular sense of timing that is not cruel so much as it is completely indifferent to your preferences. The penthouse door was unlocked. The lights were on in the living room, and Garrett was standing in the kitchen, holding 2 glasses of wine, which he nearly dropped when he turned around and saw his wife standing in the doorway in her travel coat, with her conference badge still around her neck. Petra came out of the bedroom. The 3 of them stood there for a moment that lasted approximately 1 geological era, and then Madeleine picked up her coat. She had set it down on the entry table, some reflex of arriving home. And she put it back on. She picked up her bag. She looked at Garrett, not at Petra, because Petra was not the issue. Petra was just a fact, and she said, "Don't call me tonight." And she left. Garrett called her tonight. Garrett called her tonight. He called her 11 times, as previously noted, and on the 12th attempt, he left a voicemail that she listened to once, standing in the hotel bathroom with the tap running, and then deleted. It was the kind of voicemail that contains the words you have to understand. And it's complicated, and this isn't what it looks like, which are sentences that, strung together, in that particular order, mean precisely the opposite of what the speaker intends them to mean. He called again the next morning. Then he sent the flowers. Then he sent an email with the subject line, "Can we please talk?" that she did not open for 48 hours, and when she did open it, it contained 5 paragraphs that all circled the same thing without landing on it, which was an apology, which was the one thing the email did not contain. She wrote back 2 sentences. "I've retained counsel. Please direct further communication through them." She pressed send. She went back to work. Beverly was a 63-year-old woman from Atlanta who wore her silver hair in a severe bun and had the particularity of a person who has seen every possible version of a bad situation and has never once been surprised by any of them. She had been Madeleine's attorney for 9 years. She knew everything. She knew about Aldrin. She knew about the licensing structure. She knew about the trust Madeleine had established six years ago in the name of a Delaware holding company with an unremarkable name and an extremely remarkable balance sheet. "He's going to hire Langford," Beverly said, over their coffee in Brooklyn. She met Nathan Langford, the most aggressive divorce attorney in Manhattan, who was known for a particular style of discovery that resembled a controlled demolition. "I know," Madeleine said. "He's going to go after everything he can find. He's welcome to try." Beverly looked at her over the rim of her cup. She had a way of looking at people that was not unkind, but that communicated very clearly that she was about to tell you something you needed to hear. "You're going to have to disclose Aldrin." "I know. He doesn't know about it." "No, he's going to be." "I know." Beverly set down her cup. "How long have you been ready for this?" Madeleine thought about it. Not the separation specifically, but the readiness, the general state of having arranged her life in such a way that she could walk out a door and not fall. "About 2 years," she said. Beverly nodded slowly, as if this was not surprising. "Then let's be thorough." What came next was not fast. These things are never fast. But it was orderly, and orderly was what Madeleine did best. She moved into a furnished apartment in the West Village that she had quietly leased 4 months earlier, when something she could not name had begun to feel like inevitability. It was smaller than the penthouse. The ceilings were lower. She liked it, immediately. She called her sister in Portland and told her the short version. Her sister said, "Oh, Maddie," and then, after a pause, "Do you need me to come?" And Madeleine said no, and meant it, and appreciated the offer more than she would ever be able to say. She went to the office every day. She took her Saturday morning calls on the balcony of the new apartment, watching the street below. She had dinner with a colleague from the Geneva conference who turned out to be funny in a way she hadn't noticed during the panels. She slept. She worked. She did not fall apart, not because she wasn't in pain. She was, in the particular way of someone who has invested years in something and watched it become something unrecognizable. But because falling apart was not something she had ever known how to do, and at 43, she was not going to learn. Garrett found out about Aldrin on a Thursday afternoon in October. His attorney had filed for discovery. Beverly had responded with the full disclosure package. Madeleine had been notified that the documents were transmitted at 3:14 p.m., and at 3:47 p.m., her phone rang with a number she had unblocked for exactly this eventuality. She let it ring. At 4:02 p.m. it rang again, she answered. "What is this?" It was not a question, the way he said it. It was the sound of a man who has opened a door expecting found in the ocean. "It's full financial disclosure," she said, as required. Madeleine, a pause. She could hear him breathing. "You have a company." "Yes, you have 400 million. "The current valuation is closer to 630, she said, because accuracy mattered, and she was not going to let the shock of the number cause him to misunderstand the number. "The trust is structured separately. You'll find the documentation for both in the package Beverly sent." Another pause. Longer. How long? She knew what he was asking. Not how long had the company existed. Beverly's package made that clear. He was asking how long she had known this was who she was, how long she had been this person, how long she had sat across from him at dinner and listened to him explain market trends and the limitations of people who lacked his particular vision, how long she had been the woman who held all of this while he believed he had married someone who needed explaining to. "Aldrin was founded 11 years ago, she said. "I was 32. He was quiet for a very long time. Why didn't you tell me? He said finally. It was a fair question. She had thought about how to answer it for 2 years. Because, she said, when I told you about my work in the first 6 months, you explained it back to me incorrectly 3 separate times, and when I corrected you, you changed the subject. And I decided that what I had built was mine, and I was going to keep it that way. She heard him exhale, the sound of a man trying to locate solid ground. And, she added, not unkindly, because I was right. She did not take his company. This was the part that surprised people most later, when the story filtered out the way stories do in certain circles, passed along in conference rooms and at dinners by people who had heard it from someone who knew someone. She could have. Garrett's firm had spent 2 years negotiating a major fund restructure, and there were 3 pressure points in that structure where someone with Madeleine's resources and her particular network could have caused serious damage. She knew exactly where they were. She had identified them without meaning to. The way a structural engineer cannot walk into a building without seeing the load-bearing walls. She did not touch them. She told Beverly to structure the settlement fairly. Not generously. She was not performing sainthood. But fairly. She took what was hers. She left what was his. She asked for nothing from Cross Capital, and she gave up nothing from Aldrin. You're going to leave money on the table, Beverly told her. That's fine, Madeleine said. Why? She thought about it. She thought about the morning her mother died, and the kitchen floor, and the 2 hours of quiet. She thought about the man who had done that, and the man who stood in the kitchen with 2 glasses of wine, and she thought about how both of them had been Garrett, and how only one of them had mattered, and how she had spent too long trying to make one into the other. Because I'm not interested in the table, she said. I'm interested in being done. Beverly nodded. She wrote it down. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday in December. Cold, clear, the kind of New York morning where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look briefly significant. Madeleine signed the papers at Beverly's office and then walked outside and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, her breath making small clouds in the air. She had nowhere she needed to be for 4 hours. This was almost unprecedented. She stood there and let herself feel it. Not triumph, not grief exactly, but something between them, the specific weight of a chapter that has fully closed. She bought a coffee from the cart on the corner. She walked east toward the park. She sat on a bench and watched 2 dogs argue gently over a stick while their owner looked at his phone, and the winter sun came down through the bare trees, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was unusual for her, and which she was beginning to think might be worth practicing. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the Geneva colleague. His name was Patrick. He had been funny at dinner. And he had texted twice since then, and she had texted back both times, which for her was notable. The message said, "Coffee this week? I found a place in Chelsea. You would probably find something to critique, and then like anyway." She smiled in the particular small way of a person who is just beginning to remember what it feels like to be looked at by someone who is paying attention. She typed back, "Thursday works." Then she sat a little longer on the bench in the winter sun, and she looked forward, the way she had always looked, except that now the looking forward did not cost her anything. Garrett did not rebuild quickly. That was the part nobody anticipated, because rebuilding quickly was what he did, was the whole story he told about himself, was the speech that made the men go quiet and the women lean in. But there is a specific kind of undoing that cannot be managed by momentum alone. It requires you to sit with what you have done, which is a different kind of work entirely, and not one he had ever trained for. He moved forward because he was Garrett and he did not know how not to. But he moved differently, and people who knew him noticed. He talked less at dinner parties. He started asking questions where before he had offered answers. He hired a woman to run his analytics division, and when she presented to the board, he did not interrupt her once. Small things, but they were his. He did not call Madeleine again after the settlement. She had not asked him not to. She had not needed to.
He understood,
In the end, the dimension
of what he had lost,
and he was smart enough to understand
that there was no adequate response to it. So he chose the only thing left to him, which was to become someone who might have deserved her, too late but completely.
She heard about this secondhand, through mutual acquaintances.
The way you hear about weather in a city.
You no longer live in. She received the information without particular feeling. It neither pleased her nor pained her. It was simply news of a world she had closed the door on, and the door was closed, and she had rebuilt the wall, and the light in her apartment in the West Village came through beautifully in the afternoon. Aldrin Scientific announced a new partnership with a hospital system in the spring, extending their licensing agreements to 17 new research institutions across 6 states. Madeleine gave a keynote at the announcement event. She wore a gray blazer and low heels. She spoke without notes. Afterward, a journalist asked her where she had learned to build something of that scale, and she said, "You learn it the same way you learn anything. You start before you're ready, you stay when it's hard, and you don't let anyone else define the ceiling." The journalist wrote it down. The room was full of people who had known her for years and thought they had known her completely, and who were realizing, all at once, that they had only ever known the surface of a very deep thing. She did not stay for the reception. She had a dinner to get to. Patrick had found another restaurant he thought she would probably like, and then find something to say about, which was accurate, and she had stopped pretending she didn't look forward to it. She took the stairs down instead of the elevator, because she liked the 15 seconds of moving on her own terms with no one watching, the brief private space between one thing and the next. At the bottom of the stairs, she pushed open the door and walked out into the spring evening, and the city was loud and warm and full of people who did not know her name, which had always been, for Madeleine Holloway, exactly enough.